my parents' setup, I think that was the best. As I once talked about in earlier videos, when me and my siblings were kids, both my parents worked. However, instead of daycare or anything like that, they simply structured their work schedules so that one of the at least one of them would always be home. In the summers of the early to mid 2000s, I always remembered my dad would be home in the morning, and then my mom would arrive home around lunchtime, and then they would essentially trade places. My dad would go to the office, and my mom would do some work from home, but generally throughout the day, there was always someone at home with the kids. Today, that seems like less of an option between part-time work not exactly providing the benefits that the working families need or enough pay to, you know, cover them instead of that, or worse, simply the fact that jobs pay by the hour instead of by task, which is how it should be, unless it's something like, say, a firefighter who should be paid to simply be on standby, in which case, paying by the hour makes sense because you do not want to incentivize there to be more fires. Okay, maybe you can find all the other things that firefighters can do while they're on standby for fires, and then pay them based on those tasks, like inspecting buildings for fire hazards and such. I don't know, all the things that firefighters do when there's not a fire. According to King of the Hill, they're usually just hanging around the firehouse when they're on shift, waiting for having to respond. But let's just get into today's article. This is from Vox. One Simple Trick for Republicans Who Want Moms Back in the Home by Anna North. And you can see a picture of a 50s housewife. Yeah, before we get started, be sure to give this video a like. Let me know in the comments down below whether you'd want a stay-at-home mom for your kids if you're a man, or if you're a woman, if you'd prefer to be a stay-at-home mom if possible, or if you think that my parents' arrangement from when I was young sounds like a good setup. You let me know in the comments down below if you think that might have been a good model, because personally, hearing all the arguments about the cost of childcare and such because both parents need to work, I have to wonder if simply flexible hours would be the ideal situation. Again, paying by task, so that if they manage their time correctly, they don't have to actually hit 40 hours. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the article. The MAGA movement has a particular vision of the ideal American family. For starters, there are lots of kids. There's a dad who works a manufacturing job to provide for them financially. And according to many influential figures on the right, there's a stay-at-home mom who holds it all together. Prominent Republicans, from Vice President J.D. Vance to Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, have floated policies aimed not just at boosting birth rates, a key conservative goal in recent years, but also encouraging parents to stay home with kids, as Caroline Kitchener reported at the New York Times earlier this year. Those advocating these policies typically don't specify which parent should stay home. But Howley, Vance, and other Republicans have been vocal about the importance of male breadwinners and women's childbearing and childbearing responsibilities. And within the larger MAGA project of pronatalism and manufacturing resurgence, it's fairly clear who the stay at home spouse is supposed to be. Well, historically speaking, that was the setup for quite some time, but it wasn't just, but mostly during the 50s and 60s. It was the nuclear family with the stay-at-home wife with while the husband worked the manufacturing job, and there were a lot of kids there, which is why the boomers were called the boomers, because there was a baby boom and there were way more of them. And back in those days, you could just go outside and there were other people your age out there, according to Gerbert Johnson. Compared to today, most of us in Gen Z did not grow up with that many kids living on the same street as us. All I'm going to say about that is there was still some level of community with activities and such, but by then we'd gotten to the point of overscheduling and such. But getting back to the article, most American families, however, look very different from the MAGA dream. In 2024, 74% of mothers with children under 18 participated in the labor force. As of the previous year, 45% of moms and a full 69% of black moms were breadwinners in their households. There are nearly 25 million working moms in the country, about 14% of the total labor force. And in 2023, the average American estimated that a family of four needed $85,000 a year to get by, an amount difficult to achieve on one income. These realities raise a basic question about social conservatives' goals. Would it even be possible to reverse decades-long global trends in women's employment and convince mothers to stay at home? Pro-natalist policies generally have not worked well to increase birth rates. Manufacturing jobs probably aren't coming back. But can President Donald Trump's allies find a way to make their goals for moms a reality? After several weeks of speaking with experts, I have good news for Vance et al. There is an answer. You just have to give moms $1 million. Really, the experts don't actually understand that this would cause a perverse incentive where a percentage of those moms would simply take that money and not really use it for what they are supposed to use it for. Yeah, this is why I simply say people want to have kids, they should go for it. If they don't, they should be left alone. And I'd love to know how they came to that $85,000 mark. Does it require, does that $85,000 include non essentials like a Netflix subscription, uh, mommy and me swim classes, that not the B article about large families being part of it? Does it include any of the fluff that you don't really need, or is it the actual essentials? I would love to know how they came to that $85,000 as the thing. And oh, there is an article. Yeah, we'll take a look at. Actually, let's take a quick look at how it came to that conclusion from Gallup. All right, this shows the estimates. We're just going to take a quick look. Wow, it is way more than the $30,000 poverty line for a family of four. It's the higher income respondents who believe that families need more. But is there anything that shows exactly what goes into it? Okay, in conclusion, there is no specifics of what actually goes into it, so maybe we should consult Grok on this after we finish the article. Getting back to the article, the history of moms at work. Stay-at-home motherhood is sometimes portrayed as a natural and original state of humanity, something women began to deviate around, say, the second wave of feminism in the 1960s. In fact, mothers have moved in and out of various kinds of work over the course of American history. People treat the 1950s as the conventional ideal, said Matt Darling, a senior research associate at the research firm MEF Associates, who has written on mothers in the labor force. But if you go back to the 1800s, most white women and their husbands worked together on farms. The household was an economic unit, Darling said. Yeah, I saw this play out in Dickinson. Okay, the Dickinsons didn't have their own farm, but Emily Dickinson's mom did work for, was a stay-at-home mom well into her adulthood, assuming the show is that historically accurate. Yes, it's a comedic take with intentional anachronisms for the joke. But that being said, if there's any historical accuracy to it, one, women, I think, had legal male guardians throughout their lives, and two, women for, in the case of the Dickinson family, them being well off because Edward Dickinson, the dad, was a lawyer, and then the son, Austin, was also a lawyer. Yeah, they were pretty well off. They were able to make that happen. But if you go all the way back to caveman times, well, it was mostly the males who did the hunting, while the women did the gathering and taking care of the kids. That is what happened in those days. Maybe there was a little more to it. Maybe there was an occasional female hunter in those days. I don't know. I am not an expert on this. Anyway, let's get back to the article. As the American economy transitioned from agricultural to industrial, Darling has written, more men went to work in factories and more women focused on childcare and other work in the home. Stay-at-home motherhood was never universal. Black women in the US, for example, have always worked in high numbers, with the highest labor force participation rate since record-keeping began in the 70s, and likely before, Michelle Holder, an economics professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, told me. But in the mid 20th century, families with a male breadwinner and a stay at home wife were more common than they are today. In 1950, 29% of women, 46.4% of single women, and 21.6% of married women participated in the labor force. Rather than representing a historical norm, the 1950s were one particular point in time during which a subset of American families found it most efficient for one parent to work outside the home and one to work inside it. That point in time was also fleeting. Women's labor force participation climbed steadily from the late 1940s, peaking at 60% in 1999, before dropping slightly. In 2024, 57.5% of women were in the labor force. During the same time period, men's labor force participation dropped steadily from 86.4% in 1950 to 68% today. So that means the real unemployment rate is 32% for men and 42.5% for women. If the labor force participation is 57.5% for women and 68% for men in today. I mean, gotta say this much. It's fairly equal now. Almost equal. Like there's still a higher percentage of men working compared to women. But then that raises the question of what the other 42.5% and 32% respectively are doing. I mean, you let me know in the comments down below what you think of all this. What would make moms stay home? To reverse these trends and get moms back in the home, Republicans have proposed a few ideas. One is to open up public lands for housing development, with the goal of reducing housing costs. Lower housing prices, some believe, could make it easier for families to live on one income. It is not clear if opening up public lands would actually reduce housing costs, or how much lowering housing costs would really affect people's decision around kids and family. Yeah, that is only part of the equation. You gotta factor in whether you have the energy to do it, whether someone is willing to make the personal sacrifices that are necessary. Yeah, housing costs, I think, are the least of the worries. You also have to factor in having to buy food, clothes, and other things, and more importantly, actually give them the time and attention that they need. Because that's another thing, time. And of course, there's the whole responsibility and the liabilities, such as if you let them go to the park alone, you can literally get arrested for that. Unfortunately, that has happened. So I would argue that finances are the least of your worries when it comes to all of this, to having kids and a family. Another plan is to change the tax code. Right now, parents get a tax credit of about $2,000 for each child they have, an additional credit of up to $6,000 to help defray the expenses of childcare. Some Republicans want to reduce the childcare credit and add that money to the lump sum parents get per kid, possibly bumping it up to $5,000. Is that the $5,000 bribe they were talking about a couple months ago? Research on increases to the child tax credit has shown a small effect on moms' labor force participation, Darling told me. For example, the temporary expansion of the child tax credit in 2021 led to a reduction in employment among mothers with low levels of education, according to one 2024 study. But for most mothers, even those who might like to stay home, an extra $3,000 per kid isn't enough to counteract the powerful forces that have transformed the American workforce over the last half century. Not to mention, $3,000 is also kind of a pittance. Like, what is that exactly going to cover? What I'd really like to know is, doesn't that just create a perverse incentive? They might just take that money and run. Not saying all of them would, but a sizable percentage might. And I could see single dads doing the same thing. Some of the most pressing forces are economic. Our expectations about what a middle class life is like have changed to some degree since the 1950s. Tara Watson, the director of the Center for Economic Security and Opportunity at the Brookings Institution, told me houses have gotten larger and more expensive. There's a greater expectation that kids will go to college, which also costs a lot of money. Extracurriculars like youth sports are pricier and more regimented than they once were, and they lead to overscheduling. Like I said, it's not just the money commitment, it's the time commitment. Like, take those extracurriculars like youth sports, for example. Not only do you have to pay the price to actually let them participate and to fund materials like uniforms and fund the leagues so that the equipment can be maintained and such. You have to drive them to practices and games. You are likely expected, well, if you're a good parent, you would want to watch the game and support what they're doing, but there's still the expectation that you have to be there for every Little League game. Personally, I don't think you're a bad person if you don't want to watch that game. If you do it because you want to support your kids, that's cool. I respect that. That being said, if your kid didn't care whether you were at every single game or not, and you didn't go to every single one, I would not hold that against you. Anyway, getting back to the article. If you wanted to make it easier for families to get by on one income, you'd have to make that income bigger by raising wages, some experts say. The federal minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009, Holder told me. Raising that would exert upward pressure on low-wage jobs in general, putting more money in parents' pockets. While Republicans have not generally supported minimum wage increases, one advocate of stay-at-home parenthood, Senator Hawley, is sponsoring a bill that would boost the federal minimum to $15 an hour. But there's a catch. Some believe that the transition to dual earner families happened not because of rising costs, but because of rising incomes. It sounds counterintuitive, but Darling has laid out the case, citing the work of Nobel Prize-winning economist Claudia Golden. Essentially, wages began to rise in the years after World War II, especially in fields like office work that were more open to women than factory labor had been. I mean, they probably had their fill working the factory labor during World War II. Rising wages gave moms an increasing incentive to work. If they stayed home, they'd be leaving more and more money on the table. Some research also posits that women are more likely to work outside the home when their potential earnings outstrip the cost of childcare. As Darling put it to me, it might not be worth it for me to take a job when it's $10 an hour, but it might be worth it to me when it's $15 an hour. If more women started working in part because of rising wages, then boosting wages even more might incentivize even more women to work. Instead, the only way to get more women to stay at home, some say, would be to pay them to do just that. Did they consider the costs that they of their lifestyles, like the American beauty standard of the big house, the white picket fence, the other fancy mumbo jumbo Aaron Clary talks about? Do they consider whether they're spending on actual essentials or if it's just a bunch of extras? I would argue, don't worry about college funds because college should only be if honestly, I would argue you should only go to college if you earn a full scholarship and you know exactly what you want to do and you actually follow through on that game plan. I mean, only take out loans if I would only take out a loan if it was to do something where you could make a lot of money and you could start paying it back right away. Getting back to the article, what's the going rate for giving up your career? It's not unheard of. According to the Times, Senator Jim Banks, Republican Indiana, has introduced a bill that would pay stay-at-home parents for providing childcare, an approach that's been proposed by some liberals as well. The bill would allow subsidies that currently go to childcare providers through the federal Child Care and Development Block Grant to go to family members instead. I'll be honest, I'm not completely against that because I think it might be for the better for children to be spending that time with their families rather than an underpaid stranger. Look, I get it. It's not a one size fits all, but at a certain point, this is why the extended family is probably for the better because you have someone in that network that you can defer to. Like, they can spend time with grandparents, aunts, uncles, something like that is actually it's probably for the better because not only does it result in the child care, it also results in better time spent for that kid getting to know their family rather than again just spending that time with an underpaid stranger who they are probably not going to know in 10 years. I think I mentioned it before in another video. I forget which one or if I deleted that one because I do so many videos but one of the right-wing wackaloons who's actually been banned from YouTube. He had a broken clock moment where he said the extended family was a better setup. And frankly, I have to say I agree with that. I think it is better that the extended family pitch in if they're willing and able. But I digress. You let me know in the comments down below which solution you think makes a lot more sense. The idea of compensating family members providing care isn't new or unique to Republicans. A number of states, including New Jersey, offer payment for what's known as family, friend, and neighbor care. But subsidy rates tend to be very low, and some family members who receive them say they're not even enough to cover the cost of what children need, like diapers and food, let alone enough to provide someone with a living wage. If you really wanted lots and lots of American moms to leave paid work for stay-at-home care, you'd have to pay them more. A lot more. Honestly, I would agree that anyone who is doing work that involves children should be paid more just because they are taking on a lot of liabilities. Like, I think teachers should be paid more. Not because I think it's a particular. I gotta be very careful what I say because I have a teacher in my family. I have two teachers that I'm related to. So, what's the best way to put this? It's not because. Okay, it is simply because they are assuming a lot of liability with being responsible for children. Like, I've read in articles that teachers or former teachers wrote about how they have to time their bathroom breaks very specifically because they are literally not allowed to leave a classroom unsupervised. They can't just get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of a class if they need to. Say what you will about the public school system requiring you to have to ask permission to go use the bathroom. If you think students have it bad having to do that with the exercise of power that the schools are imposing, teachers literally have to hold it in until they're not, until they have like a free period or something. See, that's exactly why I think teachers should be paid a lot more. Getting back to the article, that's because you're not just replacing their income, which in 45% of cases pays the majority of bills in the household, you're also working against 75 years of American culture. 100 years ago, many American women would have been very happy to take money to stay at home, said Alice Evans, a senior lecturer at King's College London, who writes about gender roles across society. The society already idealized white, stay-at-home motherhood, and they gained prestige and status from their role as moms. Today, however, women see success and status in having a career. And that success has been very real and goes beyond pure economics. When American women entered the workplace, they achieved greater independence and the ability to leave bad marriages. Many found new social relationships and new sources of meaning and fulfillment. Women gained more power in society, more seats in Congress and on corporate boards, and more rights, though none of this came without struggle or backlash. Yeah, I would argue at this point, yeah, women are too deeply ingrained in the workforce and all those other positions to just be completely barred from it. That being said, I personally believe that if someone wants to be a stay-at-home parent, whether it's the mom or the dad, I don't think they should be shamed for that. Honestly, I would very much prefer just a neutral thing where, hey, do you want to be a stay-at-home mom or do you want to have the career? You are free to choose, and there is no shame in either direction. Again, I think my parents' setup was the best one for the modern world. One works in the morning while the other stays home, and then they trade places around lunchtime, and then the afternoon, the other one works into the evening. Like before, up until third grade for me, my dad would get home at about 7, 8 o'clock at night after leaving for work in the early the early afternoon. Again, this setup allowed for someone to be home at all times. And it would allowed for them to take us places. Mostly my dad taking us to like the Blue Hills or the Franklin Park Zoo or something like that. Doing something more than just sitting in the house, doing nothing. Yeah, that was mostly during like when I was in preschool. Because obviously, when I was in first grade, I wouldn't be able to do that during like 9 to 3. I think you get the idea. Getting back to the article, in a 2023 McKinsey report on women in the workplace, 80% of women said they wanted to be promoted, the same share as men. The full 96% said their career was important to them. To get women to drop out of the workforce, then, the government would need to give them enough money to overcome the powerful incentives, both financial and social, that drive them to work. Maybe if someone offered me $1 million, I'd stop doing my Substack, Evans said. When I asked Golden, who won the Nobel in 2023 for her work on women's employment, whether policies like baby bonuses or larger tax credits would convince moms to stay home, she replied, "Are we giving them $1 million?" I mean, I can think of another way you could get moms to stay at home, but let's just say it would not be particularly popular, and I wouldn't endorse it because it would literally just be the government mandates this setup. Obviously, like I just said, I don't endorse that because I believe you should just be free to go about it and decide for yourself. I believe you should be free to be a stay-at-home mom if you want to do that, or you should be willing to make sacrifices like, okay, we're not going to have a Netflix subscription because we are on a single income. But if you are able to make it work, I would say go for it. But I'm also not wouldn't force it on anyone. Here's the thing, it's like I say about people having kids, there needs to be a certain level of willingness to it. If she doesn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, she should not be forced to. Not because I particularly think it's a bad thing. And I'm not against women in the workforce. What I am against is forcing people into that, because if you force a woman who doesn't want to be a stay-at-home mom to be a stay-at-home mom, do you really think she's gonna be that good of a stay-at-home mom? Because as the resentment would just be too strong. Like, I can see a lot of that just being negligence at best, cruel retaliation against someone who had nothing to do with it at worst. Whether she takes it on the husband, or worse, the children. I can definitely see rates of that going sky high. So, like I said, I am not against women in the workforce. I am completely against forcing it one way or the other. I think those who want to be stay-at-home moms should be free to do so. Those who want to be working moms or working women who don't have kids should be free to do so and left alone, unless they are doing something that is harmful to the children, in which case CPS comes in. Their CPS's problem, not ours. Let's just leave it at that. What if $1 million isn't enough? Obviously, neither Evans nor Golden has studied whether giving moms a check for $1 million would convince them to stay home with their kids. Even in today's inflationary times, that number is basically a shorthand for a lot of money. The point is, if you want mothers to give up all the benefits they get from working, you're going to have to make it really financially attractive. And that's expensive. There are about 25 million working moms in the US. Giving each one $1 million would cost the US about $25 trillion, an amount that dwarfs even the $2.8 trillion Trump's big, beautiful bill is projected to cost the country over the next 10 years. Costs grow even more if the $1 million is an annual payout rather than a one-time sum. Paying only moms in the labor force without offering the same sum to moms already caring for kids at home also seems unfair, including the around 9 million stay-at-home moms in the US would boost the total even further. The 9 million stay-at-home moms are either those who have the resources to do it comfortably, or those who choose to be a little less comfortable in favor of prioritizing the children, having a stay-at-home mom to take care of them over, I don't know, whatever, over just having more money. They're prioritizing what they think is best for the children over having more money, making what they need to survive, but not going all the way for insane heights. Yeah, it's really about what you prioritize in your life. If you prioritize your children having a stay-at-home mom, then by all means, that's not a bad thing. Again, I think my parents had best in the context of we can arrange our schedules so that one of us is always home with the kids. You know what? I'm just going to say it. That is probably the best setup without having to sacrifice too much on the money aspect, because you have someone at home in the morning who can take the kids out on interesting activities that are going to be more enriching to their development compared to just sitting at home and playing video games. Though I'll admit, in the mornings when I was waiting for the time to go to preschool, I had fun playing the original Super Mario Brothers when I was 4 years old on an NES we had. So yeah, I think my parents had the best solution to this. Oh, and then in the afternoon, you have someone who is able to keep it going. Hey, you figure out what works for you. You let me know in the comments down below which would work best for you. Getting back to the article, and that's all before we factor men into the equation. A two-parent home with a stay-at-home mom requires another person to be the sole breadwinner. According to a lot of socially conservative thinkers, that person should be a man, ideally a husband. Their words, not mine, in case anyone is trying to clip this and take that out of context to make it sound like I said that unironically and I wasn't just reading off an article. But that puts a lot of pressure on young men, many of whom aren't even sure they want to get married, let alone bear the sole financial responsibility for a family. Evans pointed out, "It's not just about giving women 1 million," she said. "How much would you have to pay men to go back to the 1950s nuclear family model, in which the entire burden of providing for a family rested on their shoulders?" I mean, wouldn't you just give all that money to the sole breadwinner man in the form of tax deductions and such? Or if wages were to go up, I don't know. I think if wages went up and they were able to support a family off of one income like back in the 50s, then I don't think many of them would have that much of a problem, comparatively speaking. Like, sure, there are definitely those who would feel a lot of pressure. And then there are the Matt Walshes of the world who would be like, "I'm motivated to do more because I have the sole responsibility of being the lone breadwinner for the family. Because that's what dads are supposed to do." Okay, that sounded a bit more like Alex Jones in that last part compared to Matt Walsh, but I think you get the idea. I think you could argue that not all of today's men are exactly psychologically equipped to be that kind of breadwinner. I mean, if the Lilo and Stitch live action remakes ending is an indicator of how society views young people in general, using Nani going off to college to study marine biology after literally surrendering Lilo to the state. If that's any indication, uh, people generally don't view 19-year-olds as capable of being legal guardians. Getting a large number of moms to quit their jobs would also have indirect costs. The 25 million mothers working today are treating patients, teaching kids, selling products, and contributing to the country's GDP in innumerable ways. There's really no way to consider having even a fraction of those women withdraw from the labor force without it affecting the American economy, Holder said. Yeah, that you wouldn't be able to just do this overnight. Again, the Game of Thrones analogy here from when Daenerys tried freeing all the slavers and slaves in Slaver's Bay. If you'll recall, Tyrion Lannister pointed out, you have to have this happen over a period of time. Something along those lines. Sorry, my Peter Dinklage impression isn't the best, but the idea of the scene was he explained that you had to have it be a transition over years, because apparently you can't just free slaves overnight without some kind of ramifications. And it's true with like any sort of policy change. Another reason that the government runs slowly, aside from the fact that the founders were wanted it to run that way so that they couldn't let tyranny take over. Or like how the Texas Congress only meets every other year to minimize the damage they do. I'm sorry. Texas seems like a great place, but that sounds like a really stupid reason to have your Congress meet only every other year. I hope there are emergency sessions during those off years if they need to do something. I don't know. I don't live in Texas. If you live in Texas and you know more about this, you let me know in the comments down below. I lost my train of thought, so we're going to get back to the article. Trump and members of his administration have at times hinted that shrinking the American economy is acceptable if it allows the country to return to its manufacturing past. But tariffs, purportedly designed to bring manufacturing jobs back home, and some hope bring men back to their former position of dominance in families and society, have been so unpopular that the administration has had to walk many of them back. It's hard to imagine that tanking the economy to get moms back in the home would fare much better. Yeah, there are some short term things. I think he's just trying to bring it in too fast, you know? I'm not against tariffs. I think in the long run, they would be effective at encouraging people to manufacture here in the US. And I'm all for manufacturing jobs being in the US because of better conditions, better working conditions, because OSHA would be there to enforce it. I would also be completely okay with it because I know that it was, honestly, as long as the products are high quality, I'm kind of neutral on where they come from. But I can also understand the argument that you want to create more jobs here. Because guess what? Not everyone needs to go to college. I'm all for the manufacturing jobs being here in the US so that we're not just service based and that we're producing actual goods. Honestly, the whole tariff situation sounds like they're trying to make it more difficult to outsource it, which I'm not completely against. I'm just going to say it. Ultimately, I would say it needs to be a transition period. You know, maybe Trump should hire Tyrion Lannister to be one of his advisors. Oh my god, I can imagine it right now. Donald, you need to make sure that you're actually giving time for these transitions. You need to make sure that over the course of XYZ amount of time, they're able to bring whatever people they need to teach the Americans, how to actually produce these particular goods. You need to also give them enough time to set up shop here in the country without prices getting too high, because then people will be mad and they might not vote for whoever you champion as your successor, since you can't exactly run for a third term unless you somehow manage to repeal the constitutional amendment within that period of time. Then Trump would be like, "You have a good point. You have a good point, Tyrion. But I want to get this done. Look, if my successor somehow doesn't win, in case they steal the election somehow, we need to make sure that this gets done now. I've only got 3 years for next January to make it official. So I tell you what, we're going to implement all of these and call it Liberation Day." Okay, enough of that. I think you get the idea. Back to the article. There are also surprisingly popular cultural forces. Think trad wife influencers, encouraging women to prioritize stay at home motherhood, but is a campaign that's unlikely to succeed at scale due to cultural fragmentation and the hyper personalization of social media. It's much, much harder for, say, government to change people's values than it might have been in the past, Evans said, because we're not all watching the same shows. Yeah, the FCC doesn't exactly regulate the internet in the same way that they're able to do broadcast television. They literally cannot threaten. Let me put it to you this way: they can't blackmail YouTube with the revocation of their video hosting license the same way they could threaten, say, one of the local affiliate stations in the area, or like local affiliate stations in general. Like, for those of you who don't know, network television is put out through various stations that broadcast over the air, and they are literally obligated to follow FCC rules because in the 20s the FCC stepped in and mandated a bunch of regulations, and they were able to do that because the broadcasts were sent through the air that we the people collectively breathe, therefore the government had its say. I'm honestly shocked the internet hasn't fallen under a similar thing at this point. Maybe because it's the World Wide Web, and therefore it's more than just however far the broadcast range is able to reach, whereas the internet is a completely different beast. And it's used for a lot more than just audio and video. So let me put it to you this way. The FCC can't come to me and be like, "All right, Henry, you have to use these talking points, or if you keep doing this thing we don't like, we're going to shut you down. Or if you don't follow these decency standards, we're not going to let you operate." They can't do that to me. Back to the article. There are, of course, other options for supporting American families. If policymakers wanted to help moms with the costs and challenges of raising kids, they could institute national paid leave programs, Holder said. They could also make childcare more accessible and affordable. In surveys, a significant minority of moms say the best setup for them would actually be to work part-time. If we wanted to make part-time work easier for parents, we could tackle unpredictable part-time schedules that make it hard for workers, especially at the lower end of the wage spectrum, to balance work and childcare, Darling said. Or they could pay by the task instead of by the hour. I'm just saying that, or I lost my train of thought. All I'm going to say is in a retail or food service job, you can probably set an availability at some point where you can only work XYZ hours and days of the week so that, and you can be like, this is for the good of my children. Yeah, that's definitely an idea. And I also think that part time work is probably a suitable compromise between having some kind of work so that you can bring in some additional money and having the ability to take care of the kids. You know what? I actually think that part time work when they're in elementary school is probably the ideal choice. Like if you, or kindergarten, this way you can have the ability to work while they're there. You can work during school hours and be able to set your availability so that you're home before school gets out and you can pick them up. And the dads can do this too. I am just putting that out there so that people don't start accusing me of being a sexist pig. All this would probably cost less than $25 trillion. But if what Republicans want is to get moms back in the home, they're going to have to pay up. I will take my million in cash. Yeah, again, I do not think that they should just pay people to have kids and do this whole thing because there are going to be people who abuse this setup. One is too many, in my opinion. I think, again, anyone who wants to have this kind of setup should figure it out. I believe if they really want to prioritize their kids having the mom in the home, they will figure it out. At a certain point, the government can only do so much. It's really up to our individual decisions. Yes, government policy can have some kind of effect. I would argue paid leave, or at the very least, a guarantee of getting your job back when your kid goes off to say, or when the youngest of your kids goes off to say preschool or first grade, when they'd be there for about 6 hours compared to the half days that kindergarten does. Or, again, my parents' setup, I think that was the best. One of them worked in the morning, they traded places at lunch, and the other worked into the night. I think that might actually be the best setup to avoid having to pay for childcare if the employment situations allow it. So on that note, I am going to leave it here for the video. You let me know in the comments down below what you think of all this, whether you agree with me that just giving them money is a terrible idea because of the perverse incentive for people who will definitely abuse this. Where you think it's up to individuals to figure it out for themselves, like my parents did with their arrangement that, again, I think is the best setup if you insist both parents are working. Not only is it a good compromise, there's always someone there. You let me know if you think that might actually be a better setup and whether you learned anything from this video. So don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for daily videos, and I will see you soon.